I'm going to tell you a great love story between Rachel and Rebecca. Partly I will paraphrase it, partly I will read it from the text. The story spans about 5 to 6 chapters, so it's impossible for us to read everything. So I've just picked out snippets from the Bible which talk about Rachel, and I've interwoven it into the story that I'm going to tell. After I finish the story, I'm going to tell you what I have learned from this story, the lessons I have learned from this story, and then I'm going to give you a chance to speak as to what you have learned from the life of Rachel. I will open it up to you all, and then anyone can speak or everyone can speak. Okay, so let's begin. Rachel. Rachel means ewe, E-W-E, a female sheep, a symbol of prosperity and security for nomadic people. Whereas her older sister Leah, means cow. So we're going to list some facts about Rachel as it is given in the Bible. Rachel is a major character in the Old Testament. She was the daughter of Laban, Rebecca's brother, sister of Leah, favored wife of Jacob, and mother of 2 of Jacob's children, Joseph and Benjamin. Rachel lived in Haran, or Padan Aram, and that's where she met her cousin Jacob. Jacob was fleeing for his life after tricking his brother Esau out of his birthright. That's in Genesis 27, 1 to 29, which you can read about. It all began in Genesis 28, verse 2, when Isaac said to his son Jacob, "Arise, go to Padan Aram, to the house of Bethuel, your mother's father, and take yourself a wife from there of the daughters of Laban, your mother's brother." So in verse 5, so Isaac sent Jacob away, and he went to Padan Aram, to Laban, the son of Bethuel, the Syrian, the brother of Rebekah, the mother of Jacob and Esau. Once Jacob reached Haran, he met some shepherds watering their sheep at a well. Genesis 29, verses 4 to 6 records this encounter. Let me read it out for you. Then he, that's Jacob, said to them, the shepherds, "Do you know Laban, the son of Nahor?" And they said, "We know him." And so he said to them, "Is he well?" And they said, "He is well. And look, his daughter Rachel is coming with the sheep." Now, while he was still speaking with them, Rachel came with her father Laban's sheep, for she was a shepherdess. That's in Genesis 29:9. So the first fact that we are told about Rachel is that she was a shepherdess. She looked after the sheep. She helped in shearing the sheep. She helped in watering the sheep. She helped in grazing the sheep. She helped in protecting the flock. And she did everything that a shepherdess would do for his or her flock, for her flock. Rachel would come every afternoon to a well near Haran, at outpost of the ancient city of Ur, to water her flock of sheep. Wells were covered with a broad flat stone, too large for one man to move. So the group of shepherds who brought their flocks to the well would gather there, and together they would move the stone away. They would water their flocks and again put the stone back. On this particular afternoon, Jacob was there too. He chatted with the shepherds, telling them that his family had originally come from this area. They pointed towards a woman in the distance, saying she was the daughter of his mother's brother, Laban. Now remember, this is the same well To which Eliza, Abraham's servant, came. And Eliza met Rebekah at this well. Now history is repeating itself, and Jacob is meeting Rachel at this well. And it came to pass when Jacob saw Rachel, the daughter of Laban, his mother's brother, and the sheep of Laban, his mother's brother, that Jacob went near and rolled the stone from the well's mouth and watered the flock of Laban, his mother's brother. Genesis 29:10. When Jacob saw Rachel, he fell in love with her. Though he had made a long journey, which was tiresome, about 500 miles, and must have been he must have been very tired. But you know, when you fall in love, it energizes you. And he removed the great stone by himself without any help, and he watered Laban's flock. The second point I want you to note, second fact about Rachel. Rachel was related to Jacob. She was the daughter of Laban, his mother's brother, and hence his first cousin. The text, Genesis 29:10, which we have just read, repeats 3 times the word Laban, his mother's brother. In many ancient societies, you know, the relationship between the child and his or her mother's brother, that is the maternal uncle, was considered even more important than the relationship of the child with the father. So 3 times in this verse, it is mentioned Laban, his mother's brother. So Rachel ran to her father's house and told her father about the young man. And her father Laban was overjoyed, and he came out to meet Jacob, welcoming him warmly into his house. Now Laban had 2 daughters. The name of the elder was Leah, and the name of the younger was Rachel. Leah's eyes were delicate, but Rachel was beautiful of form and appearance. Now Jacob loved Rachel, so he said to Laban, I will serve you 7 years for Rachel, your younger daughter. And Laban said, it is better that I give her to you than that I should give her to another man. Stay with me. So Jacob served 7 years for Rachel, and they seemed only a few days to him because of the love he had for her. Genesis 29:16-20. Fact number 3. Fact number 3. Rachel was Laban's younger daughter. She was very beautiful. Jacob wanted to marry Rachel, but money was involved in marriage. A Jewish family would provide each daughter with property or with money or with some gift which was handed over by her family and afterwards owned by the wife. It was her share of the family inheritance enough to act as an income for her should she be abandoned or widowed. A prospective bridegroom, however, was expected to give financial compensation to the family of the bride to make up for the loss of their daughter. I think someone's mic is unmuted.
Yeah, I think Charlotte, you just need to.
Yes. But Jacob had come empty-handed and could not produce the normal bride price for Rachel. So Laban agreed that his daughter could marry Jacob, but stipulated that as a bride price, Jacob would work for him for 7 years. The 7-year cycle was a sacred one in the ancient world. Jacob loved Rachel so much that he agreed, and for 7 years he worked for Laban, and it seemed only a few days to him because of the love he had for her. Genesis 29:20. At the end of 7 years, Jacob asked Laban to give him Rachel. Genesis 29:21. Laban threw a wedding feast, but when evening came, he tricked Jacob and gave him Leah instead. Jacob was unaware that he was with Leah. Perhaps Jacob was drunk from the feast, because the word used for the wedding feast in Hebrew meant a drinking feast. So perhaps Jacob was a little drunk, or perhaps Leah had a thick veil over her face. And so Jacob slept with her that night, and in the morning he was shocked to see that it was Leah by his side and not Rachel. Genesis 29:25. And he said to Laban, "What is this you have done to me? Was it not for Rachel that I served you? Why then have you deceived me?" Genesis 29:25. Rachel, the fourth fact. Rachel was promised to Jacob by Laban, her father, but he tricked Jacob into marrying Rachel's eldest sister, Leah, instead. And Laban said to Jacob, it must not be done so in our country to give the younger before the firstborn. Fulfill her week, and we will give you this one also for the service which you will serve with me still another 7 years. Then Jacob did so and fulfilled her week, so he gave him his daughter Rachel as wife also. This is in Genesis 29:26-28. Then Jacob also went into Rachel, and he also loved Rachel more than Leah, and he served with Laban still another 7 years. So the fifth fact about Rachel, Jacob loved Rachel more than Leah. When the Lord saw that Leah was unloved, he opened her womb, but Rachel was barren. The Lord saw Leah's plight, and he was gracious to Leah by giving her 4 sons, Reuben, Simeon, Levi, and Judah. God blessed her even further, although she didn't know it at that time. Jesus himself would come from the line of Judah, and that's in Jesus's genealogy in Matthew 1 and Revelations 5:5. But Rachel was barren. That's the sixth fact about Rachel. Rachel faced a problem. No matter how much she prayed to God, no matter how much she was loved by Jacob, Rachel did not conceive. In those days, a woman's status depended to a large extent on the number of male children she produced. When Rachel saw that Leah had been blessed with children and she herself was barren, she became jealous and took out her frustration on Jacob, her husband. She demanded that Jacob give her children. As Jacob had no control over this, he got angry with Rachel. In desperation, Rachel gave her maid Bilhah to Jacob so that he could conceive a child with her maid as a surrogate mother for Rachel. In that culture, any children Bilhah had would legally belong to Rachel. And Bilhah had a son, and Rachel named him Dan. Then she had a second son, and Rachel called him Naphtali. Now Leah, who had by then stopped having children, saw that Rachel had given her maid to Jacob, so she also followed, and she gave Zilpah, her maid, to Jacob as a 4th wife. And Zilpah eventually gave birth to 2 boys, and Leah named them Gad and Asher. Rachel and Leah's sibling rivalry did not end there, however. One day, young Reuben brought some mandrakes to his mother Leah, and Rachel asked Leah to give her the mandrakes in the belief that eating mandrake roots would help her have children. But Leah said to her, "Is it a small matter that you have taken away my husband? Would you take away my son's mandrakes also?" Genesis 30:15. And Rachel said, "Therefore, he will lie with you tonight for your son's mandrakes." Now you see who was controlling Jacob? Rachel. Rachel was controlling Jacob, and she lent him to Leah for the night. Then God remembered Rachel. God remembered Rachel. Does it mean that God had forgotten Rachel? No, God had not forgotten Rachel. God is an all knowing God. He knows everything from the beginning to the end. He had not forgotten Rachel. It is just a way of saying, the Bible is just trying to put words that we as finite men and women can understand. The Bible is just trying to help us to understand the Lord. God remembered Rachel and God listened to her. He listened to her means Rachel talked. Rachel prayed fervently, and that's the eighth fact. Rachel had prayed to God, otherwise God would not be able to listen to her, and God opened her womb. Rachel prayed fervently, and eventually God answered Rachel's prayer and gave her a child of her own. In the meantime, however, she had given her maid already to Jacob. Trusting God when nothing seems to happen is difficult. But it is harder still to live with the consequences of taking matters in our own hands. Resist the temptation to think that God has forgotten you. Have patience and courage to wait for God to act. That rivalry of Leah and Rachel never got over. It carried on into the children. Leah's children and Rachel's children, they were always at war with each other, to the extent that Leah's sons sold off Joseph as a slave, and Joseph went to Egypt ultimately. So that rivalry went on and on. But God remembered Rachel, and she conceived and bore a son and said, God has taken away my reproach. So she called his name Joseph and said, the Lord shall add to me another son. Genesis 30:23 to 24. And Rachel bore a son and called him Joseph. That's the ninth fact of Rachel. Now, after Joseph's birth, the Lord spoke to Jacob again and said, return to the land of your father and to your family, and I will be with you. Genesis 31:3. His two wives, Leah and Rachel, agreed to go with him. Then Rachel and Leah answered and said to him, is there still any portion or inheritance for us in our father's house? Are we not considered strangers by him? For he has sold us and also completely consumed our money. For all these riches which God has taken from our father are really ours and our children's. Now then, whatever God has said to you, do it. That's in Genesis 31, verses 14 to 16. What does this mean? A bride in those days expected to get a present from her father when she married. Either a sum of money or its equivalent in goods, cattle, land, woven goods, etc. Jacob paid for Leah, so he thought, with 7 years of work. He paid for Rachel with another 7 years of work. The amount of money, goods that were given was geared to the status of the family, of the girl's family. And so there was a family pride involved in the transaction. It was seen as the means of providing for her with certain necessities, so that if she was abandoned or if she was widowed, she would have her own money to support herself. On the other hand, the husband had to pay a bride price in order to marry the girl. And Jacob paid for Leah, so he thought, with 7 years of work, and he paid for Rachel with another 7 years of work. Just to tell you one more incident in the Bible, recorded in the Bible. David paid for King Saul's daughter, Michal, with a grisly gift of 100 Philistine foreskins, probably killing them first. That's recorded in 1 Samuel 18:25 to 27. And Othniel conquered a town as payment for Aksa. Judges 1:11 to 15. So there was a bride price to be paid in those days, and the bridegroom had to pay that price, and Jacob paid it with offering his services for 14 years for Leah and for Rachel. The two women were deeply angry that their father had ignored this practice and robbed them of what was their rightful inheritance. Instead of giving their inheritance to them, some inheritance to them, he had not done so. So they had good reason to be resentful. The purpose of the bride price was to ensure that the woman if she was left unsupported, if she was widowed, she would have some money. She would not be destitute. She would have something to fall back on. Genesis 31 verse 19. Now Laban had gone to shear his sheep, and Rachel had stolen the household idols that were her father's. Point number 10. Fact number 10. Rachel stole the household idols that belonged to her father. Why would she do that? What use was it to her? Was she a worshipper of idols? Did she indulge in idolatry? I don't think so. If you see the life of Joseph and how he was so godly, he walked with the Lord. His life was so godly that he even refused Potiphar's wife. He was able to resist temptation. You wouldn't think that she was an idol worshiper. Her act had a wider significance because the idols she stole, called the teraphim, were a form of title deed that the person who possessed them could claim the tribal's wealth. Ownership of the household deities was the prerogative of the head of the family, and by taking them, Rachel secured this position for her husband. So she took the idols, and Jacob left Laban after a time and took his family to find a home of their own back in Canaan. Laban pursued him, however, with a band of men and accused him of stealing his household idols. Jacob, unaware that Rachel had taken the idols, said, "Anyone with whom you find your gods shall not live." Remember, he's specifying you find your gods. That means he didn't believe in those gods. In the presence of our kinsmen, point out what I have that is yours and take it. Genesis 31:32. So then Laban went out of Leah's tent and into Rachel's tent. He searched Leah's tent. He couldn't find the idols. He went into Rachel's tent. Now Rachel had taken the household idols, put them in a camel's saddle, and sat on them. And Laban searched all about the tent, but did not find them. And she said to her father, "Let it not displease my lord that I cannot rise before you, for the manner of women is with me." And he searched, but he did not find the household idols. Genesis 31:33 to 35. This meant that the cloth on which Rachel was sitting was ritually unclean and could not be touched by anyone. Most ancient tribes had customs that allowed menstruating women to withdraw from physical contact with the tribe while they had their monthly periods. Rachel's manner towards her father was so sweet and yielding that Laban didn't even argue or tell her to move. And the result was that he couldn't find those idols, and he went out of Rachel's tent empty-handed. She had used the laws of ritual uncleanliness to her own advantage. Years later, Rachel became pregnant again. The birth was a difficult one, and soon after her son was born, Rachel died. Before she passed away, she named him Ben Oni, which meant son of my trouble. Jacob, however, changed the boy's name to Benjamin, meaning son of my right hand. Genesis 35:18. Rachel was buried near Bethlehem, known at that time as Ephrath, and Jacob marked her grave with a large pillar. Fact number 11. Rachel died while giving birth to Benjamin. She was 36 years of age at about that time. Fact number 12. Rachel was buried along the way to Bethlehem, not in the cave of Machpelah, the cave where Abraham and Sarah, Isaac and Rebekah, Jacob and Leah were buried. She was buried in Machpelah. So summarizing again the facts about Rachel. The first fact that we spoke about was that Rachel was a shepherdess. Second fact, she was related to Jacob. She was a daughter of Laban, his mother's brother, and hence his first cousin. Fact number 3, Rachel was Laban's younger daughter. She was very beautiful. Fact number 4, Rachel was promised to Jacob by Laban, her father, but he tricked Jacob into marrying Rachel's older sister, Leah, instead. 5, Jacob loved Rachel more than Leah. Fact number 6, Rachel was barren for a long time. Fact number 7, Rachel controlled Jacob. She gave him to Leah, she lent him to Leah for the night. Fact number 8, Rachel prayed fervently. God listened to her and opened her womb. Fact number 9, Rachel bore a son and called him Joseph. Fact number 10, Rachel stole the household idols that belonged to her father. 11, Rachel died while giving birth to Benjamin. She was around 36 years of age. And 12, Rachel was buried along the way to Bethlehem and in the cave of Machpelah. Rachel is mentioned later in Jeremiah 31:15. Let me read out the verse for you. Thus says the Lord, a voice was heard in Ramah, lamentation and bitter weeping, Rachel weeping for her children, refusing to be comforted for her children because they are no more. Rachel, Jacob's favorite wife, was the symbolic mother of the northern tribes who were taken away by the Assyrians as slaves. Rachel is pictured here as crying for the exiles at Ramah, a point of deportation. Ramah was a city in the territory of Benjamin, Rachel's son. The prophet pictures Rachel as weeping over the fate of the Hebrew exiles. In the New Testament, Matthew applies Jeremiah's words to the weeping in Bethlehem when Herod massacred the children there after the birth of Christ. That's in Matthew 2, verses 17 to 18. Rachel and Jacob's tale is one of the great love stories of the Bible. Jacob preferred her sons, Joseph and Benjamin, over his other children. He loved Joseph particularly. Genesis 31:3. And although he preferred preferential treatment of Joseph was wrong, it eventually led to the Hebrews' move to Egypt. All of this was part of God's plan for his people to prepare them for the coming of the promised Messiah, that's Jesus. So what lessons can we learn from Rachel? Now let me start by giving you what lessons I have learned. Number 1, even though God brings couples together in marriage, this does not guarantee future happiness. Jacob fell in love with Rachel at the first meeting. Their marriage was full of challenges from inside and outside their relationship. And every marriage faces challenges, and it is the prerogative of both partners to face them and solve solve these challenges amicably. Point number 2. Life is full of surprises. Laban tricked his son-in-law Jacob into marriage with both of his daughters by switching them on their wedding night. Jacob had to work twice as long to win Rachel, the woman he loved. So expect surprises along the way. That's what makes life interesting. Point number 3. Things go wrong in life. They often go wrong in life. Rachel was barren for many years, but God had promised Jacob that he would give him the land of Canaan and that his descendants would be like the dust of the land. Same promise was given to Abraham and to Isaac, and it was reiterated to Jacob. Rachel, his beloved wife who was barren, felt personal unhappiness and grief over her inability to bear children early in her marriage. If only she had clung to this promise. She didn't seek God, but took matters in her own hands and gave her mate to her husband. This only deepened the rivalry and increased the problems between her and her sister. Today we have prayer, a very powerful tool given to us which we can use when things go wrong in our lives. We have the word of God to show us the way. We have people around us to advise us. Point number 4. God is in control. We should remember that God is always in control. Rachel could not see it. She was impatient. She did not wait for God. But we must always remember that He is there for us, working things out for our good. Point number 5. God looks out for those who are troubled, for those who are sad, for those who are lonely. Despite a troubled family situation, including a deceitful father and a devious husband, God did bless Rachel with 2 sons. Though she did not live to see it, Joseph rose to power in Egypt, and God used him to preserve the nation of Israel from extinction during the famine. So are you troubled today? Are you troubled today? Are you feeling lonely? Are you feeling sad? God is looking for you. He wants to bless you in your troubles. Seek Him.